The Gospels are our sources for knowing about the resurrection of Jesus. But are they the kind of sources that historians would want when trying to establish what probably happened in the past? The answer to that question is no. When were the Gospels written? Well, they are not contemporary to the events that they narrate. While scholars do debate about when the Gospels were written, the most common datings by far are that Mark was written sometime around 65 or 70 AD. Luke and Matthew were written about 15 years later, and John around 15 years after that. John was written around 90 or 95, while Matthew and Luke were written around 80 to 85. These are the dates that are taught throughout the universities and seminaries of North America and Europe. If these dates are correct, it means that our earliest account of Jesus' resurrection is 40 years after the event. But Paul was written before that, and Paul talks about the resurrection in 1 Corinthians. That's 20 years after the event. The Gospels give us narratives, and Paul makes reference to it, but there's a 20-year gap. In other words, you don't have somebody who is actually there writing about it. None of the authors were eyewitnesses. Paul himself indicates that he was not an eyewitness, and none of the Gospel writers was an eyewitness. People call the Gospel books Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They call them that because we don't actually know who wrote these books, and there's no point in calling them Harry, Larry, Jerry, and Todd. But the fact of the matter is that the authors of these books are anonymous. We don't know who they were written by. You might not think so because they have the title, The Gospel According to Matthew. But the truth is that whoever put that title on it was an editor later. The original books are all anonymous and written in the third person. Moreover, the followers of Jesus were Aramaic-speaking peasants from Galilee. They were lower-class men who were not educated. In fact, Peter and John in Acts chapter 4, verse 13 are literally said to be illiterate. They couldn't read or write. Of course not. They were fishermen. They didn't go to school. The vast majority of people in the ancient world never learned to read, let alone write. Their native language was Aramaic. These books are written in Greek by highly educated, rhetorically trained writers who are skilled in Greek composition. Probably not disciples and don't claim to be disciples. Where did these authors get their stories from? Well, if they were not disciples of Jesus, they must have heard the stories from somebody who heard the stories from somebody who heard the stories from somebody who heard them from somebody. Stories about Jesus, including his resurrection, had been in circulation year after year after year from the time that his disciples knew that he got killed and believed he got raised from the dead. They told stories to convert people. They improved the story. Sometimes they changed the story. Sometimes the stories got modified in the process of transmission over the course of decades before anybody wrote these stories down. These stories are based on oral reports that have been in circulation for decades. What happens to oral reports in circulation year after year, decade after decade? They get changed. What evidence do we have that the stories about Jesus' death and resurrection got changed? You can read the stories yourself. Simply read Mark's account of Jesus' death, and then read John's account of Jesus' death, and make a list of everything that happens in both. Then compare your lists. You will find that there are stunning differences. In fact, there are discrepancies. Let me give you just a list of very quick examples. What day did Jesus die? That's a simple question, and luckily we're told in both Mark and John. In Mark's Gospel, we're told that Jesus died the day after the Passover meal was eaten in Jerusalem. But John tells us explicitly in chapter 19, verse 14, that Jesus died the day before the Passover meal was eaten. That's different. He couldn't die on both days, could he? What about the time of Jesus' death? According to Mark, he died at 9 in the morning. According to John 19:14, he wasn't condemned to death until afternoon. These are accounts that substantially differ from one another. Did Jesus carry his cross the entire way to Golgotha, or did Simon of Cyrene carry it? It depends on which gospel you read. Did both robbers mock Jesus, or did only one of them mock him and the other come to his defense? That again depends on which gospel you read. Did the curtain in the temple rip in half before Jesus died, or was it after he died? That also depends on which gospel you read. But those are just differences about Jesus' death. What about all of the differences in the accounts of Jesus' resurrection? such as who went to the tomb on the third day. Did Mary Magdalene go alone, or did Mary go with other women? The answer is contingent upon which gospel you read. And if Mary Magdalene went with other women, how many of them were there? What were their names? And which ones were they? By now you probably see a clear pattern here. It depends on which gospel you read. Was the stone welled away before the women got to the tomb or not? What did they see in the tomb? Did they see a man? Did they see two men, or did they see an angel? And we see that it again depends on which gospel you read. What were they told to tell the disciples? Were the disciples supposed to stay in Jerusalem to see Jesus, or were they supposed to go to Galilee? Did the women tell anybody, or were they silent about it? I'm really tired of repeating the phrase, it depends on which gospel you read. But as you can clearly see, it depends on which gospel you read. My conclusion, and I'm sure you can agree, is that these are not reliable historical accounts. There are far too many discrepancies. The accounts are based on oral traditions that have been in circulation for decades, year after year. Christians try to convert others by telling them stories to convince them that Jesus was raised from the dead, and they changed their stories while trying to convince people. These authors were not eyewitnesses. They are Greek-speaking Christians living many years after the fact. They're telling stories that Christians have been telling all these years. There was nobody there taking notes. Some of the stories were invented. Many were changed for this reason. These accounts are not as useful as historians would like. What historians tried to do is establish what the most probable scenario of what happened in the past. That is the task of history. You can't prove the past, you can only give evidence for the past, and some evidence is more certain than other evidence. All the historian can do is show what most probably happened. Miracles, by definition, are the least probable occurrence of an event. If a miracle was not least probable, it wouldn't be a miracle. If somebody could walk across lukewarm water in your swimming pool, that would be a miracle. If the water was frozen, it would not be a miracle. But if it's lukewarm, nobody in this world could do it. That's 6 billion people. So what are the chances of one person being able to do it? It would defy the way nature naturally works. I'm not saying that there are natural laws that are written down someplace that you can't break. Scientists today don't talk about natural laws, but scientists do talk about highly predictable ways that this world works. One of the ways it works is that if you are a sentient human being trying to walk across the lukewarm water in your swimming pool, you won't be able to do it. The chances would be infinitesimally remote that anybody could do it. But let's say that somebody out there could. Can you prove that this person probably did it? No, you can't prove it because you can't repeat the experiment of the past to show that he did it. That's the problem with history. It's not like the natural sciences. The natural sciences work by repeated demonstration. For example, if I wanted to show you that bars of iron will sink in that swimming pool and bars of ivory soap will float, all I need to do is to get 100 bars of both and start dumping them in. I'll dump in 100 bars of iron and they sink. I'll dump the bars of soap in and they'll float. That gives us a predictive probability of what will happen the 101st time. That's how science works. Historians don't have that luxury. Historians can only establish on the basis of surviving evidence of what probably happened in the past. And by definition, miracles are the least probable occurrence, or else they're not a miracle. This creates the dilemma for the historian and is the reason why historians cannot prove Jesus was raised from the dead. Historians, by their very nature, established what most probably happened in the past. But a miracle, by its definition, is the least probable occurrence in the past. The least probable occurrence cannot be most probable. This is the problem with the resurrection. Even if it happened, it defies imagination and cannot be accepted as a historically proven event. If you believe in the resurrection, it is for theological reasons. The resurrection is a theological assertion about what God did to Jesus. It is not and it cannot be based on historical proof.
If you enjoy our content, we'd love your support. By joining one of our channel memberships, you help us continue creating videos like this one while gaining access to some amazing perks. As a member, you'll unlock exclusive content available only to supporters, earn loyalty badges to show off in comments and live chats, and enjoy priority responses to your comments, shoutouts, and more. The best part? Memberships start at just $2.99 a month, less than a cup of coffee. Even small contributions make a big difference for the PJ Bible TV team in covering production costs and delivering the content you love. And if you're not ready to become a channel member today but still want to support us, there are other ways to help. Engaging with our videos is a tremendous way to show your support. By taking just a few moments to like the video, share it with friends, family, or on social media, and leave a comment, you're telling the YouTube algorithm to share our content with more people. Your support, no matter how you choose to show it, means the world to us. Thank you for being part of the PJ Bible TV community.